we flush that, a grenade will come out? This opened with Sapphire's shriek, which of course brought out a certain Red Afro who took over the airwaves. Nice try, Princess, but we all know that Kaiba does it best. Only his ego could fill out a screen that big. Anyway, her self-cheerleading routine forced the girls into action as they were just trying to enjoy their originally quiet evenings. And with that, they made really quick work of the villainess, and while I would usually complain about stuff like this, like in Precure, there was a bit of a narratively important and hilarious reason behind it that we'll see in just a bit. The next morning, the girls were tired from the evening before, however there was no rest for the weary, as Himeko turned into Princess for the second night in a row, this time riding a merry-go-round horse. Well, this is already looking better than Gen 5. Anyway, they quickly captured, fixed, and returned her home, and again, kind of hilariously, the girls went to school sleepy, and even tried to use some Sleepy Tom memes to get around it. Nice. During the class, Himeko offered to sell a clothing brand that she had designed for their school's upcoming bazaar. It was rejected, but she still decided to put it on her cat. You know, I still like to imagine that this kitty is an XP of the Mark Hamill cat from the OG.
They don't make straitjackets like they used to. I should know.
Anyway, she decided to show it to her parents and oh geez, okay, her mom just looks like your stereotypical rich lady, but why does her dad look like a ginger version of Dr. Wily? Maybe the whole reason we never saw Mr. Morbucks was because he looked worse than this. Anyway, it was here that we learned that, along with her OG, Himeko also seemed to have traits of Helga Pataki, as her parents clearly favored her elder sister, Miko. This was what was leading to her squeezing Sapphire's tail and in turn transforming her into Princess. I'll bring this more up later, but I will say right now, it does add an interesting little wrinkle to this version of the character. Princess then started playing the violin like Haruka before she got lessons, and thus once again forced the girls into action. Fun fact, this episode aired just a few weeks after Pluto was reclassified as a dwarf planet. And I think it was also one of the last times it was ever mentioned in animation, aside from the dog and an episode of Rick and Morty. You have my sympathies, little guy. Anyway, same old exhausting routine for our heroines. Literally sick and tired of all of this, the girls decided that they needed to figure out what was the trigger to her transformations and to try and isolate it. Thus, they watched Himeko all day and only really learned how much of a needlessly extravagant life she lived. Like seriously, diamond tip pens were one thing, but what are you supposed to do with a golden eraser, you know, other than tear your paper? Unable to attain any useful intel, they decided to sneak into her home. And they managed to do this rather easily. Seriously, I think the Yotsuba family had better security. Then again, maybe the real security at this mansion was the fact that it was an endless maze of absolute entitlement. Just use the backwards jump glitch and you'll reach Bowser eventually. The girls regrouped in the center of the mansion and continued their search for clues. They snuck around the maids, Himeko's parents, and, jokes that haven't aged all that well. Actually, why am I surprised? This is Toy we're talking about. They still can't get enough of their Mexican stereotypes. Eventually, they found a massive DVD library filled with mostly recordings of Miko. In comparison, Himeko's collection was smaller than my American comic book collection. Seriously, these are pretty much the only Western comics I own. Support your smaller and independent creators. But yeah, while they were kind of on the nose with the whole neglected little sister trope earlier, an interesting little detail they included in this one was the fact that all of Princess's attacks were seemingly based on what Himeko had seen through the DVDs, and thus was trying to emulate her sister in a misguided attempt to garner attention of any sort, because she certainly wasn't getting any from her awful parents. Seriously, I'd honestly say Mr. Morbucks was a better parent, as while he was also neglectful, at least he did pay Princess some attention, as well as likely all of her prison bails. And in general, this Freudian excuse does make Himeko a much more fleshed out character than her OG, whose motivations for being evil were mostly because she was a textbook example of a sociopath. Anyway, they eventually found Himeko, who, while not exactly a great violin player, was at least competent at the organ. That said, you probably shouldn't let your cat rest near the foot pedals. And it was here that we finally got to see a transformation sequence for Himeko. Took a little while considering we've seen her transform on screen at least twice now. It was short, but I do like how it does slightly emulate the Girlz' sequences with jump cuts, making it look like an evil version of theirs. Having seen this transformation firsthand, the girls now knew what Himeko's trigger was and thus took both of them back to the profs. They then discussed ways of preventing Sapphire from transforming her. This coming from the company that often encourages being animals' sweets. Instead, they figured they could prevent her transformation by changing Sapphire's voice with a special collar. It seemed to work until... Okay, I joked a few weeks ago, but did this show legit inspire the creation of Splatoon? Anyway, Utonium then tried to change the voice again, and... one last voice change, and we got a piano-playing octopus. Well, clearly, she was no Squidward. And yeah, I would question how Sapphire's shrieks are affecting Princess if she's not within earshot, but honestly, this was all way too hilarious for me to even care. Eventually, the girls did figure out that the solution to defeating her was to give her exactly what she wanted: recognition. So the girls threw a celebration, only slightly less fake than the Oscars. It worked, and for the time being, it seemed to quell Himeko's insecurities over her sister. With that, the episode ended with the girls believing that they could finally get a good night's rest until Mojo picked the worst night to become the show's butt monkey. This was a really funny episode that also managed to slip in some good character building for one of the show's main rogues gallery. From the beginning, it was clear that Himeko was meant to be a far more fleshed out character than Princess Morbucks, clearly showing signs of an inferiority complex early on. This episode followed up on that by giving her sympathetic, yet still kind of over the top motivations behind them. Combine that with some of the better animation of the show so far, and you get a really enjoyable outing. Unlike her petty, sociopathic OG, this show did a good job making Himeko still a rich brat, but also kinda sympathetic. Sure, some of the presentation here was a little on the nose. I don't think we needed this dialogue from Himeko to know that she was envious of her sister, but there were some subtle signs that she was a lonely little princess. Stuff like her clearly being nowhere near as popular at school as she thought she was, only really getting claps from her obvious groupies, or of course all of her princess attacks, including the crazy hair, being modeled after Miko's many talents. It adds an interesting layer to the character that doesn't make her too sympathetic. I mean, she's still an overprivileged little brat. On that note, there was some great comedy here, like how overly the top rich she was. In general, this episode was a good example of escalating visual humor with stuff like the girls growing more and more tired, or Himeko and her very expressive hair. This whole sequence in particular was hilarious thanks to some very smooth animation, at least by this show's standards. Yuji Hakamada definitely deserves credit for this, and it's just a pity that we don't see him much in Precure these days. So, overall, this is a pretty great episode. If the sleep-deprived Powerpuffs weren't making you laugh, then Himeko's backstory might have made you feel sorry for her, but then you remember she has a golden throne that even Richie Rich would say is overdoing it. Work on the Toy Trinity video is back on track, and hopefully I should have something done by the end of the week. I'll admit, it has become a little bit of a passion project because I just love rewatching some of my favorite tokusatsu shows, though judging by y'all's comments, you're enjoying it too, so that makes it all the better. So look forward to it, as well as the conclusion to my Gold Princess reviews, which I hope to get done before I have to tackle yet another one of my annual videos. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I gotta get back to my accounting job. Now let's see here. Who's my next client?
Talk about great mileage. This thing gets 7 feet for 1 tank of gas.
Hello, Knights of Number Crunching.